Hey guys, tonight we step quietly onto cobbled streets that still glisten with yesterday's rain. You're in Bruges, a medieval town that looks like someone spilled gingerbread houses into a canal and never cleaned them up. The year doesn't matter. Think late Middle Ages, somewhere in that blur of centuries where life was measured not in emails or likes, but in how many wheel spokes you could finish before supper. And here's the reality check. You probably wouldn't survive a week of it. Between the damp, the diets, and the plague popping up like a bad Wi-Fi signal, your modern immune system wouldn't stand a chance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love for you to drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air smells of wet straw and faint wood smoke as you wander toward the edge of town. A cart squeaks past, one wheel wobbling dangerously, pulled by a horse that looks just as tired of Mondays as you do. Ahead, you find the workshop, a low, timber-framed shed with its doors wide open, spilling the glow of firelight and the rhythmic clack of tools. Your host, the Cartwright, waves you in with a hand roughened from decades of chiseling. His palms are like sandpaper that gave up on being smooth. Inside, the smell is a cocktail of oak shavings, hot iron, and that lingering tang of ale that never quite leaves a craftsman's breath. He shows you the tools of his trade, adzes, augers, hammers, each one worn down in ways that tell its own small biography. You run your fingers along the wooden handles polished by years of use, and they feel warmer than expected, almost like old friends waiting for you. Here's a mainstream fact to tuck under your pillow. Bruges was one of Europe's busiest trade hubs in the late Middle Ages, its canals buzzing with goods from England, Italy, and the Baltic. That meant people like our Cartwright were always busy. No wagons, no trade. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some wheel rims were once fitted with strips of raw animal hide when iron was too expensive, turning every cart ride into a medieval squeak fest. And historians still argue whether small craftsmen like this truly thrived in guild-dominated cities or merely scraped by under a mountain of rules. Your host leans on a beam, grinning faintly. His wife calls from the back room, scolding him for tracking sawdust into the house again. You smile, realizing that across centuries, some domestic conversations never change. Outside, a bell rings for vespers, the sound sliding across rooftops and rippling into the night. The streets are dimming, and the town grows quiet except for a distant laugh and the lapping of canal water. You step back out, cool air brushing your cheek, and follow your host toward the square, where more of this strange medieval week is about to unfold. You step out into the morning air of Bruges, the damp coolness clinging to your cloak, and the faint warmth of the workshop hearth already fading behind you. The Cartwright waves you along, and you follow him back into his space, that blend of sawdust, sweat, and quiet pride. The day has begun, and so has his labor. The sun has barely cleared the tiled rooftops, but the rhythm of a workshop doesn't wait for the skies to brighten. You trudge into the work area, ears filled with the tapping, scraping, and the occasional muttered oath when a tool bites the wrong way. It's a soundscape as steady as a heartbeat, only made of iron and oak instead of blood and muscle. Your eyes settle on the half-finished wagon in the middle of the floor. Its frame sits on trestles, stripped bare of wheels, looking less like a vehicle and more like a skeleton waiting for flesh. The Cartwright explains that wagons are built in stages. First the frame, then the wheels, then the fittings that hold the whole stubborn contraption together. You nod slowly, as if this is something you do every day. Though the last time you put something together, it was a piece of flat-pack furniture that required 3 coffee breaks, 1 argument, and a YouTube tutorial. A Cartwright in medieval Flanders isn't just a carpenter. He's half engineer, half blacksmith, half therapist, to complaining neighbors who blame their broken wheels on faulty craftsmanship rather than their own reckless driving. Yes, people broke wagons then as often as we break phones now. The wood, mostly oak, has to be carefully seasoned, dried in stacks for months or years so it won't warp. The smell of it is sharp, tannic and familiar. Oak has a way of clinging to your nose, earthy and almost bitter. He shows you how to test a piece by running a hand along the grain. Straight grain, he mutters. No knots, no tricks. The wood should sing when struck, not sulk. You listen, and sure enough, when he raps the plank, it rings like a dull note on an old piano. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the morning. Workshops like this one weren't isolated sheds on the edge of town. They were often part of a dense neighborhood of trades. Smiths, wheelwrights, coopers, all cheek by jowl. The smells mingled. The noise never stopped. And the guilds kept a close eye on who did what. Production wasn't assembly line fast, but it was community-based, each trade relying on the others. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some wheel hubs were greased with animal fat, and if you couldn't afford beef or lard, there's an old mention, though scholars doubt it, that people used butter. Imagine a hot day in Bruges, wheels squeaking faintly of dairy. You can almost picture a wagon smelling like breakfast as it rolls by. Historians still argue whether those sources were literal or just satire poking fun at peasants. Butter or not, wheels turned and carts creaked along. The Cartwright picks up an adze, the blade curved and sharp, and begins to hollow the inner surface of a wheel spoke. The sound is hypnotic. A scrape, then a thud, then a long breath. You catch yourself swaying slightly, lulled by the pattern. He notices, smirks, and says something that's probably the medieval equivalent of, "Don't fall asleep standing there." The joke is light, but his eyes are serious. Tools this sharp don't forgive inattention. Everywhere you look, there are shavings curled on the floor, pale ribbons of wood that crunch under your boots. Each shaving is thin enough to read through if you hold it up to the light, though reading material back then was scarce, and usually in Latin anyway. You think about that as you watch him work, and you picture some weary apprentice one day using curls of oak to practice letters in soot, bored during a long afternoon. And maybe that's how history sometimes gets preserved. Not in scrolls, but in tiny accidents of curiosity. The Cartwright hands you a mallet, grinning, and gestures toward a peg that needs driving into place. You lift the tool, and it feels heavier than you expected, the wooden head dense with years of use. You swing, not too hard, not too soft, and the peg slides home with a satisfying thunk. He nods approvingly. Congratulations. You've just taken part in a process unchanged for centuries. No diploma, no certificate, but maybe a blister forming as a souvenir. The morning stretches out, the work continuing in rhythms both familiar and alien. Sawing, planing, hammering, fitting. Each action feeds the next, and though there's no ticking clock on the wall, time is measured in progress. One wheel closer to finished, one ambuot closer to polished. You catch the Cartwright humming under his breath, some half-song with no words, just a low vibration that blends with the workshop's chorus. It's soothing, the kind of tune that keeps hands steady and minds from wandering too far. And yet, your mind does wander. You imagine these carts rolling out of Bruges, filled with bolts of cloth, barrels of herring, or maybe just a farmer's weary family. Each one is a vessel of stories, creaking over mud, rattling across stone, carrying laughter, quarrels, and occasionally a chicken or two that really didn't want to travel. Carts weren't glamorous, but without them, trade slowed, armies stalled, and markets emptied. Sometimes, the boring stuff holds up the entire world. You glance at your host, sweat streaking his brow, and wonder aloud how many carts he makes in a year. He shrugs, giving a number that sounds modest to modern ears. Maybe a handful of wagons. More if repairs count. Quality, not quantity, is the measure. He chuckles, saying something about how a shoddy cart comes back to haunt you like an unpaid debt. And you think, yes, that hasn't changed at all. Buy cheap, buy twice. Another scholarly debate slips into your thoughts. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen had a clear working-class identity, or whether they saw themselves more as small entrepreneurs, straddling the line between survival and pride. Did our Cartwright feel like a cog in a machine, or a master of his own small kingdom of oak and iron? His calloused hands suggest the first. His steady grin hints at the second. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between. By late morning, the light through the workshop door shifts to a golden. You follow the Cartwright back inside after that short break, belly warmed by broth and bread that seemed humble but filling in its own right. The workshop greets you again with that blend of sawdust and iron tang, like a recipe for industry passed down through centuries. Today's lesson is not about frames or wheels, but about the lifeblood of his trade. The tools that shape the cart from raw oak to rolling transport. They lie scattered on benches and hung on walls, not displayed like museum pieces, but waiting like soldiers ready for duty. Each one carries weight, literal and metaphorical, because without them, the Cartwright would be only a man staring helplessly at a tree. The first tool he lifts is the adze. It looks like a cousin of an axe, but bent at an angle, its blade jutting sideways like a stubborn jaw. With this, he hollows beams, shapes curves, and smooths surfaces that must be both strong and precise. You try to picture yourself swinging it all day, the arc digging out curls of wood, and your back aches just thinking about it. He demonstrates with a steady rhythm, the scrape and thud forming a sound like a heartbeat slowed to a crawl. You laugh softly, realizing it's the kind of sound that could replace white noise machines today. Want to sleep better? Forget rain sounds. Just loop an adze carving oak. He sets it down, and your eyes wander to a line of mallets. Some are heavy, some small, their wooden heads darkened by years of use. Handles are polished smooth, not by design, but by sweat and repetition. He lifts one with ease and shows you how a peg is driven flush into its mortise with careful strikes, not brute force. The trick, he explains, is to let the tool's weight do the work. It's a rule that applies to a lot of life, you think. Sometimes you don't push harder. You just guide what already has momentum. For a moment, he grows animated, showing off the auger. It looks awkward, a spiral of iron on a wooden shaft, but it bores holes through timber like a lazy screw. He twists it into a beam, shoulders straining, and out comes a perfect tunnel through which pegs or iron bolts will later be fitted. You bend low, peering at the grain curling out in neat spirals, and wonder how many hours of his life have been consumed by this simple twisting motion. Tens of thousands, maybe, enough to fill libraries with holes. Here comes your mainstream historical fact. Tool making in the medieval world was itself a trade. Blacksmiths forged the blades, and carpenters shaped the handles. Workshops like this were connected webs, each relying on another, meaning your Cartwright wasn't just a craftsman, but part of a larger choreography of labor. Tools were expensive, so losing one was like losing a limb. Apprentices were often sent home in disgrace if they misplaced even a single chisel. And the quirky tidbit of the day? Some craftsmen believed their tools developed personalities over time. There are accounts of men swearing that a favored mallet knew how to strike true, or that a faithful adze sang sweeter in their hands. It sounds silly now, but when your livelihood depends on chunks of iron and wood, a little superstition feels like insurance. Historians still argue whether such beliefs were genuine folk traditions, or just grumpy old men trying to keep apprentices from stealing their favorites. The Cartwright hands you a plane. Its wooden body is simple, the blade sharp, and he motions for you to drag it along a plank. You hesitate, then push. The shavings curl up like parchment, falling in pale strips to the floor. The smell is sweet, clean, almost like fresh bread, but with that earthy undertone. You smile, realizing you've just made the surface smoother with a tool design that has barely changed in 800 years. Some things don't need improvement. They just need someone willing to keep using them. As the morning deepens, your host continues the tour of his arsenal. Chisels lie in rows, their edges gleaming despite the dim light. Each one has a purpose, wide ones for shaping, narrow ones for detail, some beveled, some flat. He shows you how a slip of the hand could ruin a whole wheel, not to mention your thumb. You instinctively pull your hands back, joking that maybe you'll just watch from here on. He chuckles, probably thinking you wouldn't last a day as his apprentice, and he's not wrong. The room grows warmer as the sun climbs higher, beams of light catching the dust motes that swirl like lazy snowflakes. You find yourself hypnotized by the motion, imagining each speck a reminder of hours shaved away, of lives built one chip of oak at a time. Your host pauses, pours himself a cup of watered ale, and you share a sip. It's flat, sour, but safer than water, which carried its own risks. You wipe your mouth, suppressing a grimace, and he laughs, reminding you that taste was never the point. Survival was. The hum of tools resumes, blending with muffled noises from the street. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays with theatrical indignation. You grin, realizing that medieval soundscapes weren't so different from today's city noise. They just swapped engines for animals. You lean against the wall, letting the rhythm of his labor wash over you, and it becomes a kind of meditation. Each tool tells its story, each mark on the bench a memory, each groove on the handle a record of time's passage. Another thought intrudes. Historians still argue whether medieval workshops like this were places of innovation or simply repetition. Was each cart an improvement on the last, or were they made by rote, tradition dictating every measurement? Looking at the Cartwright now, you sense both. His hands move with tradition, but his eyes scan, each detail like an engineer searching for better solutions. Perhaps that's the eternal balance, holding on to what works while always nudging it forward. The tools gleam faintly as he sets them back in order. They're not trophies, but companions. He pats one mallet as if it were an old dog, then stretches his back with a groan. The day is far from over, but already you feel the quiet weight of centuries pressing into this little workshop. The tools remain steady, unchanged, waiting to outlast both master and apprentice, and maybe even you, drifting in this strange, borrowed week. You step outside for a breath, blinking at the sunlight. The noise of town rises sharper now, market stalls setting up, voices bargaining, horses clattering. You know the day is about to widen beyond tools and beams. The square calls, full of gossip, laughter, and smells of goods both fresh and dubious. But for now, you carry with you the rhythm of iron and wood, a symphony of tools that shape not just carts, but the pulse of trade itself. You return to the workshop just as the light shifts through the open door, painting stripes of gold across benches worn smooth from decades of use. The Cartwright waves you closer, pride glowing in his eyes. And now the conversation moves to the materials themselves. Wood and iron, the twin foundations of his trade. Without them, no cart could hold weight, no wheel could spin. No merchant could move goods from one town to another. The smell of oak, strong and earthy, mingles with the sharper tang of forged iron, and you realize the story of transport is not just about wheels, but about two stubborn elements being forced to work together. He picks up a beam of oak, running his hand across its grain. Oak is his favorite, though he admits it isn't always kind. Strong, heavy, and resistant, it gives structure to frames and spokes, standing up to years of jolts and bumps on muddy Flemish roads. He knocks it with his knuckles, and the sound rings with a hollow authority. Oak doesn't just hold weight, it announces it. Yet oak must be dried carefully, seasoned in stacks where wind can move through. Otherwise, it warps, twists, and laughs at your efforts. You picture piles of timber in yards outside the city, stacks higher than rooftops, each log slowly losing moisture over seasons. Patience is a silent tool, he reminds you. One no apprentice wants to learn, but every master must enforce. Elm, by contrast, is more forgiving. He pulls a curved spoke from a pile and shows how the wood bends without splintering. Elm fibers run interlocked, resisting cracks that might shatter a wheel on rough ground. Spokes often choose elm, he explains, while hubs might take ash, strong enough to drill deep holes for iron-shod axles. You nod as if all this is second nature, though in truth, you're filing it away with the useless trivia you already carry, like why pigeons bob their heads, or how medieval cooks sweetened wine with honey. Still, there's comfort in the specifics. Oak for strength, elm for bend, ash for hubs. It feels like a secret code that makes wagons roll. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the day. Medieval Europe relied heavily on oak forests, not only for carts, but for ships, houses, and even barrels. Oak shaped economies and landscapes alike, to the point where some regions regulated how much could be felled each season. Without oak, Flanders might have been stuck carrying goods on weary backs, and Bruges would never have blossomed into a trade hub. The Cartwright lifts a band of iron next. Thin, curved, and blackened by the smith's fire, it waits to be fitted around a wheel. He explains how iron rims must be heated until glowing, then hammered quickly onto the wooden wheel before it cools. The heat scorches the wood, sealing it tight. The image is vivid. Apprentices scrambling, masters shouting, sparks flying. The whole scene more like a kitchen fire than carpentry. You almost feel the scorch against your skin, just listening. And now for the quirky tidbit. In some cases, when iron was too dear, craftsmen wrapped wheels in strips of rawhide or twisted rope soaked in pitch. It worked for a while, until rain softened the hide, or wheels smelled faintly of barnyard. Imagine riding into town, cart squeaking and stinking faintly of cow. Practical, yes. Elegant, not at all. Historians still argue whether such improvisations were common practice or just rare desperation in lean times. You lean closer to a finished wheel, marveling at its complexity. It's easy to forget how much geometry hides inside what looks like simple circles. Spokes slot into hubs at precise angles. Felloes, the curved wooden segments forming the outer rim, join like puzzle pieces. And finally, the iron band clamps it all into unity. The Cartwright gestures, explaining that if even one spoke sits wrong, the whole cart will shake itself apart on the road. You picture merchants bouncing miserably as their goods rattle loose, silently cursing some careless craftsman. Suddenly, you understand why guilds were so strict about quality control. As you listen, the sounds of the town drift in. Church bells striking midday, voices rising in barter, a child laughing somewhere nearby. The contrast is striking. Outside, the market bustles. Inside, a man and his tools wrestle with stubborn oak and heavy iron. You run your hand across a finished plank, the wood cool under your fingers, and think about how much energy lies hidden in such ordinary objects. The Cartwright pauses for a moment, wiping sweat from his brow. He jokes that wood has moods, just like people. Some planks cut easily, smooth as silk, while others resist every tool, snarling with hidden knots. He claims he can tell when a piece is in a bad temper just by the feel. You laugh, not entirely sure he's joking. Perhaps centuries of listening to trees teaches you something modern science can't. As the afternoon drifts on, he leads you outside to a small yard where stacks of timber rest under slanted roofs. The air smells of resin, sharper now in the sun. Birds perch on the piles, indifferent to the history they sit upon. He points to one stack, saying it has been drying for 3 years. You whistle softly, realizing that patience here is measured in seasons, not hours. He shrugs, remarking that the best things can't be rushed. A cart that collapses on the road isn't just a broken frame, it's a broken livelihood. Another scholarly debate drifts into your thoughts. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen treated their resources with sustainable care or simply exploited forests until they were gone. Some regions clearly managed forests deliberately, replanting after felling, while others cleared until hills stood bare. Looking at this Cartwright's careful stacking, you sense respect, but you wonder if respect always outweighed demand. Perhaps even then, balance was fragile. Back in the workshop, he shows you how wood and iron must meet. He clamps a hub in place, sets spokes carefully, and hammers them in with steady rhythm. Each sound echoes like a drumbeat. Then he fetches a rim of iron, black from the forge, though today it's cold and safe to handle. He sets it loosely around the wheel to demonstrate, pointing to the gaps that will vanish once heat shrinks it tight. You can almost hear the hiss, smell the smoke, feel the rush of urgency when real fitting happens. For a moment, you're glad it's only a demonstration. Your nerves might not survive the sparks. The Cartwright smiles faintly, proud of the silent union between wood and iron. He says every wheel is a marriage. Wood gives life. Iron that keeps it together. You grin, thinking that some marriages probably squeak as much as carts do, though you wisely keep that thought to yourself. The light grows lower, casting shadows that stretch across the floor. The day has tilted toward evening, and work slows with it. Tools are set aside, shavings swept into corners, and the smell of cooked stew. The square of Bruges opens before you like a stage, every sound layered, every scent mingled, every sight crowded. You trudge along beside the Cartwright, your boots clicking against cobbles worn smooth by centuries of merchants' feet. Stalls cluster close together, their canopies in bright cloth that sags a little where rain pooled earlier. You hear the flap of banners in the breeze, the bray of a donkey protesting its burden, and the distant echo of church bells reminding everyone that even while business thrives, the rhythm of prayer hovers nearby. The Cartwright greets acquaintances as he moves through the crowd. A butcher waves a cleaver in greeting, which looks more alarming than it is. A baker dusts flour from her apron and offers a smile, scented faintly of yeast. Guild gossip floats on the air as freely as the smoke from roasting fish. It seems half the market is talking about who raised prices, who undercut a rival, and who got caught with timber that maybe wasn't as well seasoned as they claimed. You quickly learn that gossip here is as important as coin. At one stall, a wheelwright eyes your host with mock disdain. Their trades overlap, and the rivalry shows in their smirks. The wheelwright claims his spokes outlast any Cartwright's assembly. Your host mutters that a wheel without a strong frame is just a circle destined to collapse. You grin at the banter, realizing competition keeps the quality sharp. This, you understand, is not just a market for goods, but a market for reputations. A botched wheel or a cracked frame becomes news faster than you can blink, and reputations take seasons to mend. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval markets in towns like Bruges were not only economic engines, but also tightly regulated by city authorities and guilds. Weights and measures were inspected, stalls assigned, and fines issued for cheating. Order mattered because trade was the lifeblood of the city. Without trust, goods wouldn't flow, and Bruges would wither. And here's the quirky tidbit. In Bruges, fines for swearing too loudly in the market could be enforced with a day in the stocks. Imagine trying to haggle over cheese prices and suddenly ending up as public entertainment. Historians still argue whether such fines were consistently applied or mostly symbolic threats to keep tempers polite. Either way, it explains the careful tone people use here. Even when insults fly, they're veiled with humor. You follow your host to a cloth merchant's stall. Bolts of dyed wool spill over the table in hues that shimmer even in the flat light. Deep scarlet, indigo, and green. The Cartwright fingers the cloth absent-mindedly, not as a buyer, but as a man who will one day haul these bolts to another town. The merchant eyes him knowingly, remarking that wagons are as important as looms in keeping trade alive. You catch the pride flicker in your host's expression, quick and quiet. Children weave between stalls, dodging legs with practiced agility. One stops to gawk at you. Your clothes and manner must seem strange. He offers you a roasted chestnut from his pouch, with a grin missing 2 teeth. You accept, biting into the hot, earthy nut, surprised by its sweetness. The Cartwright chuckles, saying street food is the same everywhere. Delicious, filling, and guaranteed to burn your tongue. As you wander further, you see fishmongers stacking herring in neat rows, the salt pungent in the air. A vendor calls out prices, while a cat prowls beneath the table hoping for scraps. You recall that salted herring was a cornerstone of medieval diets, sustaining entire populations through winters. Without wagons to carry barrels inland, Many towns would have starved. Again, you're reminded that this boring cart business is anything but trivial. It's the hidden skeleton of prosperity. A man with a cart of apples passes by, the wheels squeaking faintly. Your Cartwright eyes it, murmuring about poor workmanship. He points out how the spokes wobble, the hub cracked from strain. You nod solemnly, pretending you see it too. He claps you on the shoulder, amused at your act, and says that someday you'll recognize shoddy work at a glance. You smile, wondering if he realizes you'll slip back into your own century before that lesson sticks. The noise of bargaining rises, voices weaving in a tapestry of sound. "Too dear!" someone shouts, followed by, "Best quality in Flanders." Another insists, "A fair price, no more, no less." It's theater, and every buyer and seller knows their role. You drift between stalls, letting the cadence soothe you. It's oddly similar to modern markets. The blend of laughter, irritation, and stubbornness over pennies that somehow matter enormously in the moment. Another scholarly debate threads into your thoughts. Historians still argue whether medieval townsfolk experienced markets mainly as economic duty or as social entertainment. Looking around, you suspect both are true. For every merchant serious about profits, there's a group of neighbors swapping jokes, a pair of young people sneaking glances, or children laughing as they chase each other through legs and baskets. The square is as much stage as storehouse. You pause near a spice seller whose stall seems exotic. Cinnamon, pepper, and cloves rest in tiny heaps, expensive enough to buy a month of labor. The scent is dizzying, richer than anything else in the square. The seller leans forward, whispering about caravans and distant seas, though you know much of the spice trail is more complicated than his sales pitch suggests. The Cartwright snorts, saying spices are fine, but carts and barrels matter more in daily life. You can't help laughing at the practical wisdom. Dreams of the East may dazzle, but sturdy wheels pay the rent. The day lengthens, shadows stretching across cobbles. Musicians appear near a corner, lutes and drums filling the air with cheerful rhythms. People clap along, some dance, and for a moment the market feels less like business and more like celebration. Your host allows himself a grin, clapping in time before moving on. Even craftsmen need rhythm outside their own hammer strokes. The smells thicken as food stalls fire up for the evening. You catch the aroma of sizzling sausages, onions caramelizing, and sweet pastries dusted with sugar. Your stomach growls, and the Cartwright teases you for being distracted. He buys a small pastry, hands you half, and warns that it's best eaten quickly before children beg it away. The sugar crunches between your teeth, a fleeting luxury amid the plain breads you've had so far. As dusk approaches, torches are lit in iron sconces, flickering light over the stalls. The square glows warmly, and conversations continue as though night is no obstacle. The Cartwright begins steering you gently toward home, his arms heavy with small purchases, his expression satisfied with both gossip heard and errands done. The market is closing, but the buzz lingers, an echo that will carry into taverns and homes. You glance back once more at the square, now alive with shadows and laughter. It's messy, noisy, and crowded, but it's also the beating heart of Bruges. Here, stories are traded as much as goods, and reputations are built one cartload at a time. You feel drowsy with the rhythm of voices, the glow of torches, and the gentle certainty that tomorrow the square will open again, ready to repeat its play. The evening has settled over Bruges, and with it comes a slower rhythm. One that trades the clang of iron and chatter of merchants for the comforting murmur of home. You trudge alongside the Cartwright as he guides you through narrow lanes, the scent of fresh bread fading into the sharper tang of hearth smoke. A lantern swings from his hand, its dim glow catching glimpses of damp cobblestones and shuttered windows. Your stomach grumbles at the faint aromas drifting from kitchens. Onion, leeks, a hint of broth simmering. Tonight is not about wheels or spokes. Tonight is about meals and ale, those anchors of medieval life that seem plain until you realize how they stitched people together. Inside his home, you are welcomed by the warmth of firelight and the clutter of everyday living. The single main room serves as kitchen, dining space, and refuge from the chill air. His wife tends a pot over the hearth, stirring slowly, steam curling upward to mingle with the smell of barley and cabbage. A couple of chickens cluck indignantly from a corner pen, as if reminding everyone they, too, might end up in the pot one day. You sit on a wooden bench at a rough table, its surface scarred from knives, spills, and countless evenings exactly like this one. He sets before you a wooden bowl filled with pottage, that staple of medieval diets. Thick, earthy, and endlessly adaptable. It is made of grains boiled into softness, flavored with whatever vegetables are on hand. Tonight, there are onions, leeks, and a few scraps of salted pork that lend the broth a richness. You spoon it up slowly, the taste humble but hearty, filling your mouth with warmth. No delicacy, no luxury, yet deeply satisfying after a day that smelled of sawdust and iron. For bread, there is coarse rye, its crust hard enough to test your teeth. You tear off a piece, dipping it into the broth to soften it. Your host laughs when you struggle a little. He tells you bread was often darker, heavier, and chewier than the fluffy loaves you know. White bread existed, but it was reserved for the wealthy or for feasts. You nod, chewing thoughtfully, realizing that daily bread was not just a phrase, but a challenge met at every table. The ale arrives next, poured into wooden mugs. It is cloudy, pale, and tastes faintly sour, but refreshing in its way. Stronger ales are saved for festivals, while this everyday brew is light enough to drink without stumbling. You raise the mug, take a cautious sip, and feel the fizz of fermentation prickle faintly on your tongue. Safer than water, more sustaining than plain broth, ale was the fuel of the medieval household. The Cartwright drinks deeply, sighs, and leans back as though the day has finally loosened its grip. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval households across Europe, including Flanders, relied heavily on ale as a daily drink, consumed by adults and children alike. Water sources were often unsafe, so light ale provided hydration without the risks of disease. Brewed frequently in small batches, it was a constant companion to bread and pottage. And here's your quirky tidbit. Records mention that some households brewed ale flavored with herbs like nettle, rosemary, or even ground ivy. One peculiar recipe suggests tossing in a bit of henbane, a plant that could cause hallucinations if used carelessly. Imagine sitting down to dinner, expecting a warm buzz, only to end up arguing with invisible saints over whose turn it was to stir the pot. Historians still argue whether such recipes were experimental accidents, local traditions, or scribal jokes copied down for amusement. The meal continues in comfortable silence, punctuated by small laughter. The Cartwright tells you about customers who complain about prices while sipping imported wine that costs more than a cartwheel. His wife rolls her eyes, adding that gossip travels faster than wagons in Bruges. Their children, sitting close by, whisper about market games, too shy to speak loudly but curious about the stranger at their table. One child offers you a small turnip as if it were treasure. You accept it solemnly, and the room erupts in quiet laughter. The conversation drifts to lighter tones. Your host tells a joke about a donkey refusing to pull a cart until promised better shoes, and you chuckle despite yourself. He follows with another about a wheel so crooked it could only roll downhill. The humor is simple, earthy, but it fits the mood. Jokes over mugs of ale, laughter echoing against plaster walls, a family drawing closer after long hours apart. You realize that in many ways, this is the truest glimpse of medieval life. Not the grand events in chronicles, but these small moments around firelight. As the ale warms you, your eyelids grow heavy. You shake your head, reminding yourself you're here to witness, not to sleep just yet. The Cartwright nudges your mug forward, teasing that only another drink will keep you awake. You protest weakly, but the second sip steadies you, the sourness sharp enough to clear the fog. You smile, murmuring that perhaps medieval insomnia was treated not with lavender oil, but with ale refills. Another scholarly debate drifts into your mind. Historians still argue whether medieval diets were monotonous and malnourishing, or surprisingly balanced for their time. On one hand, peasants often relied on pottage and rye bread. On the other, access to vegetables, fish, and occasional meat might have offered more variety than we assume. Looking at the Cartwright's table, grain, broth, pork scraps, and ale, you sense both truths. Simple and repetitive, yes, but nourishing enough to keep bodies moving through long days of labor. The fire crackles lower, embers glowing red in the hearth. The children drift toward sleep, heads resting against arms. The wife gathers bowls, stacking them with practiced grace. The Cartwright leans back, satisfied, his eyes reflecting the glow of fire and ale alike. Outside, the noise of the market has faded, replaced by distant footsteps and the bark of a dog. Bruges at night is quieter, though never entirely still. You sit back, stretching legs stiff from the bench. Your mind turns toward the comfort hidden in routine. Meals repeated day after day, mugs lifted, bread torn, broth stirred. It is boring, perhaps, yet boredom itself. Morning light filters through the shutters, streaks of pale gold cutting across the room where the Cartwright's family begins to stir. You rise slowly, shoulders stiff from the straw mattress, but mind clearer than you expected. Chickens in the corner scratch and cluck, already impatient for scraps. A pot simmers faintly on the hearth, steam whispering upward. The Cartwright's wife hums under her breath as she kneads a lump of dough, her rhythm steady, hands sure. Domestic life here is not glamorous, but it is steady, and that steadiness is its own kind of luxury. You sit quietly, watching as the morning routine unfolds. Children shuffle sleepily, rubbing eyes, reaching for crusts of yesterday's bread. Their hair sticks up in wild tufts, and their laughter soon fills the small space. The Cartwright's youngest tugs at his father's sleeve, insisting he come see the new chicks that hatched overnight. With a sigh and a smile, he obliges, crouching near the pen where tiny yellow fluff bobs awkwardly. You lean closer, amused by the gentle pride in his eyes. This, too, is part of his world, not just wood and iron, but feather and straw. On the table, a simple breakfast appears. More rye bread, a wedge of cheese, and a pitcher of watered ale. You chew slowly, the crust rough on your teeth, the the cheese sharp and salty. The Cartwright explains that mornings are rarely feasts. Those are for holidays. Most days begin with this: plain, filling, enough to fuel hours of labor. You nod, thinking of modern breakfasts dressed up with coffee and sugar. There is a quiet honesty in this bread and cheese, unpretentious and grounding. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval households in towns like Bruges were often multi-generational, with parents, children, apprentices, and sometimes even extended kin under one roof. This structure created stability, but also meant cramped quarters. Privacy, as you know it, simply didn't exist. Life was communal, each role visible, each task interwoven. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some households, animals shared living quarters with the family, not just out of convenience, but for warmth. Chickens, goats, even pigs sometimes stayed inside during colder months, their body heat contributing to comfort. You picture a medieval winter night with snores mingling from humans and livestock alike. Historians still argue whether this was a widespread necessity or just an occasional practice in poorer homes. Looking at the clucking corner here, you sense the line between household and barn was thinner than you'd ever imagined. The Cartwright's wife scolds him lightly for leaving sawdust on his boots last night, sweeping the floor with brisk strokes. He grins sheepishly, making no excuses. The children giggle, repeating her words with exaggerated tones. You chuckle, realizing family dynamics haven't changed much. Messy shoes and weary excuses transcend centuries. The domestic rhythm is familiar, if not the details. One child pulls out a small wooden toy, a cart carved crudely, wheels uneven, but rolling nonetheless. The Cartwright takes it, inspects it with mock seriousness, and declares it sturdy enough to carry a king's treasure. The child beams, proud of the wobbly creation. You watch, touched by the way craftsmanship is passed down here, not in lectures, but in play, in shared moments that weave skill into memory. The wife ladles out a small pot of hot grain mash, thicker than last night's pottage, sweetened with a drizzle of honey. It's a rare treat, she explains, honey not always being easy to find. The children dip their bread eagerly, sticky smiles spreading across their faces. You take a bite, the sweetness surprising amid the usual earthiness of rye and broth. It feels almost decadent, though by modern standards it is modest. Conversation flows lightly. The Cartwright talks of orders waiting in the workshop, wheels to finish, axles to repair. His wife counters with news from neighbors, who is expecting a child, who quarreled over land, whose roof collapsed in last week's rain. The children chatter about games in the street, daring each other to race carts or climb walls. Each story overlaps, weaving a tapestry of ordinary life that feels richer than chronicles of kings. The Cartwright leans back, mug in hand, and asks you what families are like where you come from. You hesitate, unsure how to bridge centuries in a sentence, so you simply say that families still argue over chores and laugh over meals. He nods, satisfied. Perhaps the details shift, but the essence remains. Work, rest, food, quarrels, laughter. These, you realize, are constants. Another scholarly debate comes to mind. Historians still argue whether medieval families prioritized affection or obligation. Was love central, or was survival the only binding force? Watching this household, father teasing children, mother smiling at their games, laughter mingling with scolding, you suspect the truth, again, lies somewhere in between. Obligation framed the days. but affection softened the edges. The morning stretches gently. The children are sent outside to help with chores, scattering with energy. One carries a small basket to fetch eggs. Another gathers kindling. The Cartwright shoulders his tools, preparing to return to the workshop. His wife hums again as she kneads another round of dough, rhythm steady, eyes focused. Life flows forward, each action ordinary but necessary. You step outside with the Cartwright, pausing at the threshold to glance back. The room glows with firelight, cluttered yet warm, every surface telling a story of use. Chickens cluck, bread bakes, laughter lingers. Domesticity may seem boring, but here it is the very foundation that allows wagons to roll, markets to bustle, and towns to thrive. Without this steady pulse of family, all the grander wheels of history might simply collapse. The street is already alive. Neighbors call greetings across narrow lanes, laundry hangs from windows, and the smell of fish mingles with that of fresh hay. Children chase one another between carts, shouting gleefully. The Cartwright points toward the workshop, but before you follow, you linger a moment, taking in the hum of domestic life as it spills into the public square. It is noisy, chaotic, imperfect, but also deeply human. You walk on, boots striking cobbles, You trail beside the Cartwright through the narrow lane, and soon enough, the neighborhood reveals its character, loud and busy, woven from the tangled lives of craftsmen and families. Homes stand shoulder to shoulder, timber frames leaning slightly, walls patched with plaster that shows cracks like wrinkles earned from age. Doors hang open, spilling laughter, arguments, and the occasional bark of a dog. This is not the quiet order of the market, but the messy heartbeat of daily life, where neighbors share as much rivalry as camaraderie. The Cartwright greets a cooper repairing barrels outside his shop. The man grins, but his words carry a teasing edge, mocking last week's cartwheel that squeaked like a mouse choir all the way to the docks. Your host rolls his eyes, retorting that a barrel that leaks ale is a sin worth excommunication. The two men laugh, but you sense the underlying pride, neither willing to admit a flaw in his craft. This is how rivalries keep men sharp, each jibe a challenge to do better next time. Children scurry through the lane, dragging sticks that clatter against walls. One group chases a stray goose, the bird hissing furiously as it zigzags between legs and baskets. Neighbors shout warnings, some amused, some annoyed. The goose dashes straight at you, wings flapping, and you stumble back, laughing despite the near collision. The Cartwright chuckles, saying geese are the true rulers of Bruges, and you cannot disagree. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Neighborhoods in medieval towns like Bruges were often organized by trade. Carpenters, smiths, weavers, and coopers clustered together, forming networks of shared tools, apprentices, and sometimes gossip heavier than hammers. Guilds encouraged this closeness, believing it fostered quality and accountability. If one man failed, his neighbor's reputation suffered too. And here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval towns sometimes had official street criers, whose job was to announce lost animals. One record even lists a goose described so precisely that you wonder whether the owner loved it more than his children. Historians still argue whether such announcements were taken seriously or treated as comic relief in crowded squares. You glance again at the furious goose still honking in the distance, and perhaps the answer is both. The Cartwright steers you toward a smithy where sparks fly from the doorway. Inside, the blacksmith hammers iron on an anvil, each strike echoing like thunder contained in a small room. The men exchange greetings, but the smith wastes no time jabbing about woodworkers who lean too heavily on iron bands to save weak wheels. The Cartwright fires back, claiming iron bends where oak endures. You watch, amused at how rivalry never rests, even among friends. Yet when a merchant arrives asking for a wheel rim and a frame to match, both men nod in quick agreement. Rivals or not, cooperation pays. Back outside, a neighbor leans from her window, scolding her son for skipping chores. She catches sight of you, asks who this stranger is, and the Cartwright explains with a shrug that you're simply visiting, a friend curious about carts. She smirks, suggesting you look too soft for such work. You grin awkwardly, secretly agreeing. Her laughter follows you down the lane, proof that even visitors are quickly woven into neighborhood banter. You pause near a small tavern squeezed between homes. Its door creaks open, releasing the rich scent of ale and roasted onions. Men inside raise mugs, laughter spilling into the street. Your host explains that many quarrels between neighbors find resolution here after sundown. A feud over chickens or a cracked fence can fester in daylight, but dissolve over a shared pitcher of ale at night. It is a cycle as reliable as the sunrise. Another scholarly debate drifts through your mind. Historians still argue whether medieval neighborhoods were genuinely cooperative communities or simmering cauldrons of tension barely held in check. The evidence points both ways. Guild records praise mutual support, while court records list endless disputes over boundaries, debts, and insults. Looking around, you sense the truth lies in the messy balance of laughter and rivalry, where daily survival requires both trust and stubborn pride. The Cartwright leads you further, pointing out the homes of fellow craftsmen. That one belongs to a tanner, he says, though the stench of curing hides reaches you before the explanation. Another belongs to a weaver, whose windows reveal looms clattering. He mutters that weavers always complain about deliveries, expecting wagons to move faster than tired horses can manage. You nod politely, though you suspect the complaints sound familiar across centuries. Customers always want quicker service, no matter the era. A donkey brays loudly as you pass, its voice startlingly human in its tone of complaint. The Cartwright laughs, saying the beast belongs to his neighbor, a man convinced that donkeys are cleverer than horses. The animal stomps its hoof as if in agreement. You reach to pat its rough mane, and it stares back with an expression so judgmental you almost apologize. Perhaps the neighbor is right. The lane narrows, leading you toward a communal well. Women gather here, buckets clanking, voices rising in conversation that blends news, jokes, and gossip. They pause to greet the Cartwright with polite nods, then turn to their talk, glancing occasionally your way. You hear snippets: who quarreled with whom, whose daughter has a new suitor, whose bread failed to rise. Information flows as freely as water, and you realize this well is more than necessity. It is the neighborhood's heartbeat. The Cartwright dips his bucket, hauling it up with practiced strength. He drinks, wipes his mouth, and hands you the rope to try. You heave awkwardly, water sloshing as you pull. The women laugh softly at your clumsy effort, hiding smiles behind hands. You grin sheepishly, admitting defeat. The Cartwright pats your back, amused, saying not all labor can be learned in a day. The afternoon stretches on, filled with the ordinary dramas of neighborhood life. A quarrel breaks out between two men over a fence post, voices sharp, hands gesturing wildly. Others gather, some egging on, some calming down. Eventually, the tension breaks with laughter, and the men walk away still muttering, but less fierce. The Cartwright shrugs, saying disputes rise like storms, but pass just as quickly. Tomorrow, they may be sharing ale again. You wander further, listening to the mixture of noises: children shouting, animals bleating, hammers striking, gossip spilling. It is chaotic but alive, each sound weaving into the tapestry of daily survival. Rivalries sharpen skills, friendships soften burdens, and laughter keeps bitterness from growing too deep. You think again how chronicles speak of kings and wars. But here in the streets, history lives in the stubborn pride of a wheelwright, the gossip at a well, the bray of a donkey. As the sun begins to lower, the Cartwright guides you homeward. The air cools, neighbors retreat indoors, and shutters close one by one. You glance back at the lane, alive only minutes ago. Now quiet, except for a final goose honking. The evening draws you and the Cartwright toward the Guildhall, its broad timber frame rising proudly at the edge of the square. Lanterns flicker by the door, their glow spilling across stone steps worn by countless feet. This is not just a building. It is the heartbeat of the craft, where rules are spoken, oaths renewed, and rivalries kept within bounds. You trudge up the steps beside him, the murmur of voices already audible inside, a low chorus of pride and fatigue mingled together. The door opens, and you step into a space heavy with warmth and smoke. Long tables stretch across the hall, crowded with men of the trade, their hands rough, their backs bent from labor, but their laughter filling the rafters. The air smells of ale, roasted meat, and damp wool, an aroma that clings to every cloak. The Cartwright nods in greeting, shoulders loosening as he takes his place among equals. You sit with him, and a mug of ale is pressed into your hand before you can protest. The first sip is sharp, stronger than the thin household brew you had earlier. Around you, voices rise in jest and argument. One man tells of a wheel that collapsed beneath a merchant's load, swearing it was the merchant's fault for carrying too much salt. Another retorts that perhaps the craftsman should have prayed harder while shaping his spokes. Laughter erupts, mugs clink, and you smile, realizing these jests are both camaraderie and critique. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Guilds in towns like Bruges served as both professional associations and social networks. They regulated standards, set prices, oversaw apprenticeships, and even provided charity for members' families. Membership wasn't optional. It was the seal of legitimacy, the difference between being a respected craftsman and a shadow worker risking fines. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some guilds assigned playful nicknames or staged mock trials for members who broke small rules. A rat caught dulling tools might be called blunt blade for a season. One record even mentions a baker forced to sit on a wooden donkey in the square as punishment for cheating scales. Historians still argue whether such punishments were primarily symbolic theater or genuinely humiliating acts that kept craftsmen obedient. Looking around at the laughter here, you suspect both humor and discipline in equal measure. The Cartwright leans close, explaining how each apprentice must swear loyalty to his master and to the guild. The oath binds him to secrecy, to honesty, and to the long grind of learning. He remembers his own swearing day, his voice cracking from nerves, his master's hand heavy on his shoulder. He chuckles, admitting he nearly spilled ale on the guild book before signing his mark. You imagine rows of names, shaky signatures that carried lifetimes of toil. The evening continues with a kind of ritual. A guild elder rises, his hair silver, but his posture proud. He speaks of work done, of standards kept, of pride in their craft. His voice carries authority, but also warmth. He reminds the hall that each cart leaving their shops carries not only goods, but the reputation of Bruges itself. You feel the weight of his words, heavier than any wagon load. Plates of roasted meat arrive, venison seasoned with herbs, far richer than the household pottage of last night. The Cartwright explains these feasts are rare, funded by dues, meant to bind members together. You chew slowly, savoring the gamey flavor, thinking of the contrast between humble daily bread and this occasional luxury. It is both reward and reminder. Labor has dignity, and community sustains it. Across the table, a young apprentice listens wide-eyed as older men swap stories of disasters narrowly avoided. One tells of a wheel that shattered on a mountain pass, another of a cart that slid into a river but somehow floated long enough to save the cargo. The apprentice laughs nervously, clearly wondering what calamities await him. The Cartwright pats his shoulder, saying every craftsman carries scars as proof of learning. You notice the boy's relief, tempered by determination. Voices grow louder as mugs empty and refill. Songs begin, rough but spirited. Verses about wagons, wheels, and the stubbornness of wood. One chorus mocks merchants for overloading carts. Another praises the strength of elm. You tap your mug in rhythm, smiling at the absurdity of men turning carpentry into music. The hall shakes with laughter, the rafters echoing with song. Another scholarly debate drifts through your mind. Historians still argue whether guilds truly protected workers or simply entrenched elite masters at the expense of poorer craftsmen. Were they mutual support networks or monopolies designed to crush competition? The evidence is mixed. Charity funds for widows suggest solidarity, but harsh restrictions on outsiders hint at exclusion. Watching tonight's haul, you see fellowship, but you can also sense hierarchy in the way elders dominate the floor. Balance, again, is fragile. The Cartwright whispers that newcomers must learn not only skills, but also how to hold their ale. Apprentices who stumble home after one mug earn teasing nicknames that last for years. He recalls his first feast, when two elders propped him up after he nearly slid under the table. His grin is sheepish, but his pride shines through. He survived, and now he laughs at others. The elder calls for silence, and a moment of solemnity enters the hall. They toast to the city, to the guild, and to St. Joseph, patron of workers. Mugs lift, voices rise, ale spills across tables. The sound reverberates like a pledge, binding men together more tightly than iron rims bind wheels. For a brief instant, you feel swept into their circle, caught by the gravity of centuries-old ritual. Later, as the feast winds down, the Cartwright nudges you and shares a secret nickname once pinned to him, Crooked Spoke, after a mistake he made in youth. He laughs at it now, but at the time it stung. You laugh with him, realizing nicknames carry both sting and affection. Perhaps ridicule is just another way of saying, you belong here, flaws and all. The hall grows quieter, men drifting out in groups, voices fading into night air. The Cartwright stands, stretches, and nods toward the door. You follow him outside, cool air sharp against flushed cheeks. Behind you, the guild hall remains lit, glowing like a beacon. Ahead, the streets of Bruges stretch dark, but alive with the soft echoes of laughter, footsteps, and distant bells. You walk slowly, footsteps echoing side by side. The Cartwright carries himself with quiet satisfaction. Tonight he has shared his The bells of Bruges toll softly in the distance, their deep notes rolling across rooftops and canals, summoning the faithful to evening prayer. You trudge alongside the Cartwright through the narrow streets, the stones damp beneath your boots. the air carrying a faint chill that sharpens your senses. Lanterns glow dimly, their flickering flames bending in the breeze. Ahead, the church looms, its spire a dark silhouette. Against the twilight sky, its bells vibrating like a heartbeat that calls everyone, rich or poor, into its rhythm. Inside, the scent strikes first. Beeswax candles mixing with incense, the air thick yet soothing, wrapping the senses in solemnity. You follow the Cartwright and his family into the nave, where rows of benches creak under the weight of parishioners settling in. Some whisper greetings, others cross themselves quickly, and children fidget, earning gentle taps on the shoulder from weary mothers. The murmur dies as the priest appears, his vestments shimmering faintly in candlelight. You sink into the stillness, letting the chant begin to wash over you. The voices rise and fall in plain song, slow and steady, notes stretching into the vaulted ceiling like smoke seeking escape. The sound is mesmerizing, equal parts prayer and lullaby. You find yourself swaying slightly, carried along by syllables you cannot understand, but somehow feel. For a moment, it doesn't matter if you belong here. The cadence itself pulls you in. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Daily life in medieval Flanders was punctuated by the bells of the church. They rang for prayer, for work, for danger, for celebration. Time wasn't measured in hours on a clock, but in the intervals between bells. Religion shaped not only faith, but the structure of the entire day. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some churches employed boys to mimic the sounds of demons during morality plays, shrieking and growling to terrify audiences into piety. Imagine sitting through a solemn sermon, only for a teenager to leap out making monstrous noises. Historians still argue whether these performances educated effectively or simply became entertainment that distracted more than inspired. The Cartwright kneels, his hands folded, his children imitating him with varying degrees of seriousness. One peeks sideways at you, then hides a giggle when caught. His wife bows her head deeply, lips moving silently. You follow suit, more out of respect than belief, but you feel the hush pressing gently against your shoulders. The rhythm of voices, the scent of incense, and the dim candlelight all weave together, forming a cocoon of calm. When the service ends, parishioners linger, gossip sneaking back into whispers as quickly as reverence had silenced them. One woman boasts of a relic newly arrived in a nearby church, supposedly a fragment of the true cross. Another scoffs, claiming the relic is no more authentic than a sliver from her chopping block. The Cartwright listens politely, but exchanges a glance with you, half amusement, half skepticism. Another scholarly debate curls into your thoughts. Historians still argue whether relics were genuine sources of faith or calculated tools of economics, drawing pilgrims whose coins supported entire towns. Was it devotion, or was it business? Standing here, listening to merchants and mothers discuss the cost of candles as much as the power of saints, you suspect the truth is once again both. Faith fed the spirit, but it also fed the city coffers. Outside, the sky has deepened to indigo, stars beginning to pierce through scattered clouds. The Cartwright explains that prayer is not only obligation, but rhythm, a pause to mark the passing of another day. He admits he sometimes finds more holiness in the rhythm of his ads than in the drone of a sermon, but he still attends. Habit, expectation, and perhaps a kernel of hope draw him back. You nod, understanding how rituals anchor people in time, even if their minds wander. The children skip ahead, chasing each other along the path, their laughter breaking the solemn air. You catch yourself smiling, grateful for the way joy threads through even the strictest routines. A cat darts across the street, pausing to glare before vanishing into shadow. Your host mutters that cats always seem to judge prayer, then laughs softly at his own joke. You follow the family toward home, passing shrines tucked into corners of streets, candles flickering before wooden statues. Some are decorated with flowers, others barely noticed. People nod in passing, crossing themselves, muttering brief prayers. It is a constant hum of devotion layered over everyday life, as normal as greeting a neighbor or buying bread. The Cartwright stops to speak with a neighbor about tomorrow's work. The man insists that wheels squeak more loudly when one forgets to pray while fitting the iron rim. The Cartwright rolls his eyes, but listens politely, promising to say a blessing over his next spoke. You grin at the mixture of belief and superstition, realizing faith bleeds into every corner of life, from grand cathedrals to muddy wheels. Later, as you step inside the Cartwright's home, the fire has been rekindled, the smell of stew filling the air again. The children collapse onto benches, their energy finally drained. The Cartwright's wife sets bowls on the table, murmuring that prayer is all well and good, but supper waits for no saint. Everyone laughs, and the tension of solemnity dissolves into domestic warmth. You eat slowly, savoring the simple flavors, feeling the rhythm of the day winding down. Outside, the bells have fallen silent, leaving only the occasional bark of a dog or the rustle of wind through eaves. Within, the family leans close, sharing bread, trading jokes, and preparing for rest. Another scholarly debate comes to mind. Historians still argue whether medieval religion was genuinely internalized by ordinary people or followed mainly out of social expectation. Did faith burn deeply, or was it ritual without reflection? Watching this family, you sense that both coexist. Belief blends with habit, hope mixes with obligation, and together they carry people through uncertain lives. The Cartwright raises his mug in a small toast, murmuring thanks for another day of labor and laughter. His children echo him, mugs of Waterdale clinking lightly. You raise yours too, the sour drink grounding you in this borrowed moment. Later, as you lie down again on the straw mattress, the rhythm of the day echoes in your mind. Bells. The night has deepened, yet Bruges does not sleep entirely. You trudge through the narrow lanes alongside the Cartwright, lantern light swaying in his hand, the glow carving small circles into the darkness. The air is cooler now, carrying the faint scent of damp stone, roasted meat long since eaten, and the sharper edge of smoke from hearths banked for the night. Streets once filled with market chatter have thinned into shadows and whispers. A cat darts across your path, its eyes gleaming for a moment, before vanishing into the gloom, leaving you half convinced it was judging you from another world. The Cartwright explains that the city enforces curfew, bells ringing at set times to remind citizens when to shutter their doors and bank their fires. Yet not everyone obeys. You hear a faint laugh echo from an alley, followed by the clatter of a mug against cobblestones. Somewhere, a group lingers too long in a tavern, ignoring the calls of the watchmen. Their voices carry, slurred but cheerful, a reminder that rules bend as often as iron. Lanterns hang from iron hooks at intersections, their flames wavering in the breeze. They are few, and the darkness between them feels heavier than expected. The Cartwright mutters that the lamps were installed partly for safety, partly to discourage thieves. You glance into the gloom of side alleys and imagine shapes moving just beyond sight. The silence is broken only by the creak of shutters and the scuff of your boots. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many medieval cities, including Bruges, maintained a night watch. These men patrolled the streets after curfew, carrying staves or halberds, tasked with catching thieves, enforcing quiet, and sometimes dousing uncovered flames. Though often underpaid, they were the city's thin line against chaos after dark. And here's your quirky tidbit. Records mention that in some towns, watchmen were fined if they fell asleep on duty, yet they were also fined if they made too much noise waking people up. Imagine trying to balance silence with vigilance. Too quiet, and thieves thrive. Too loud, and neighbors complain. Historians still argue whether these patrols were effective deterrents or mostly symbolic, their presence more comforting than practical. The Cartwright leads you past a canal, its dark water reflecting slivers of moonlight. The surface ripples with the faint splash of a fish, or perhaps something less ordinary. He chuckles, saying children whisper of monsters in the canals, serpents that tug at boats and pull drunks into the water. He admits he has never seen one, but he tells the story anyway, half serious, half amused. You smile, realizing ghost tales survive as much on laughter as on fear. A watchman approaches, lantern in one hand, staff in the other. He nods curtly at the Cartwright, eyes scanning you curiously. Your host mutters a greeting, explaining you are a guest. The watchman grunts, satisfied, then moves on, his footsteps fading into the night. You exhale quietly, realizing even a friendly inspection in the dark can raise your pulse. The Cartwright points out how different the streets feel now. By day, the square is crowded, noisy, and alive with trade. At night, silence thickens, broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or a distant clatter of hooves. He insists that most crime occurs in these hours, though sometimes it is nothing more than neighbors quarreling too loudly. He laughs softly, saying that not every shout in the night hides a thief. Sometimes it is just two men arguing about ale. You pause near a shrine at a street corner, a small wooden figure of a saint illuminated by a single candle. Someone has left a sprig of herbs at its base, perhaps rosemary for protection. The flame flickers, casting the saint's face in shifting light. The Cartwright bows briefly, muttering a prayer for safety, and you mimic him awkwardly. Whether faith or habit, the gesture feels grounding in the heavy dark. Another scholarly debate stirs in your thoughts. Historians still argue whether medieval cities were truly more dangerous at night than modern ones. Records describe thefts, assaults, and fires, but they also exaggerate for dramatic effect. Was the danger constant, or was it the fear of darkness itself that magnified every creak and whisper? Walking here, the shadows feel thick enough to make either answer believable. A sudden crash startles you, a shutter slamming open above. A woman leans out, shouting at a neighbor for leaving barrels in the street. The neighbor shouts back, defending himself, and soon others lean from windows, offering advice, jokes, or insults. The Cartwright shakes his head, grinning, saying neighborhood disputes never rest, even under moonlight. You laugh, realizing that medieval midnight arguments are just as lively as modern online debates, loud, circular, and often unresolved. The streets narrow again, forcing you closer to the Cartwright. Your lantern flickers, and shadows stretch long across the walls. You hear the clop of hooves, two men guiding a small wagon through the night. Its wheels squeak, its load covered with cloth. The Cartwright lowers his voice, muttering that some wagons move at night to avoid guild scrutiny or city tolls. You glance back as it passes, curious about what lies under the tarp, but the men say nothing, their eyes fixed ahead. Secrets, it seems, roll just as smoothly as open trade. You continue walking until the lane opens into a smaller square. Here, a few taverns still glow, music spilling faintly from within. The Cartwright explains that curfews are strict on paper, but taverns with the right connections often stay open longer. Inside, men drink, sing, and argue as if the night were endless. He warns that this is where trouble begins. Ale loosens tongues, and words spill into quarrels. You nod, sensing the truth of it from the muffled shouts and laughter. Another cat crosses your path, this one carrying something in its mouth, perhaps a fish stolen from a barrel. The Cartwright mutters that cats keep rats at bay, but steal when they can. He says some neighbors call them holy creatures, others call them devils. You smile, reminded that cats have always defied clear categories, both useful and suspicious. As you near his home again, the streets grow quieter. The lantern sways gently, and the sound of your boots echoes softly. You feel the weight of the day settling into your bones. Tools clanging in the workshop, gossip in the market, laughter in the guild hall, prayers in the church, and now the hush of streets, softened by shadows. Each layer builds upon the last, weaving the rhythm of medieval. Morning sunlight glimmers on the canals as you and the Cartwright make your way toward the outskirts of Bruges, where wagons line up like tired beasts and foreign voices ripple through the air. The market square is busier than usual, crowded not only with locals, but with merchants who have traveled from distant lands, their carts creaking under the weight of exotic goods. You trudge beside your host, the smell of salt herring and fresh straw mingling strangely with perfumes you cannot identify. The hum of conversation is a patchwork of languages: Dutch, French, German, and others you can only guess at. Each voice bargaining, boasting, or calling out prices. The Cartwright points toward a line of stalls where foreign cloth is unfurled. The colors are astonishing, deeper and richer than the wool you saw earlier. Velvet from Italy glows in sunlight, crimson and gold, while bolts of linen shimmer pale and smooth. Merchants caress the fabrics as if they were treasure. Your host leans close, muttering that fine cloth means fine carts, for goods like this must be carried safely across muddy roads. Without sturdy wheels, even the richest velvet ends as ruined rags. You nod, realizing once again how humble carts prop up dazzling luxuries. At another stall, barrels of herring glisten under layers of salt. The smell is sharp, almost overwhelming, but buyers crowd close. The fish, you learn, comes from the North Sea, preserved in such quantities that it feeds entire towns far from the coast. The Cartwright reminds you that wagons haul these barrels inland, ensuring the fish becomes as common in mountains as in harbors. He gestures at the squeaking cart nearby, wheels straining under the load, and you wonder how many fish will reach their destination intact. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Bruges thrived in the late Middle Ages as a major trade hub, its markets linking Baltic herring, English wool, Italian silks, and Flemish cloth. Merchants from across Europe passed through, making the city one of the busiest crossroads of its age. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some merchants supposedly tried to advertise herring as miracle food, claiming it cured ailments from headaches to heartbreak. One tale even insists a merchant swore herring could prevent baldness, though judging by his own shining scalp, the cure was less than effective. Historians still argue whether such claims were genuine marketing strategies or satirical exaggerations copied by later scribes. You pause by a spice merchant whose stall glows with tiny piles of cinnamon, pepper, and cloves. The scent is intoxicating, richer than anything else in the square. Buyers lean in, speaking in hushed tones, as if handling relics rather than food. The Cartwright scoffs, muttering that spices are luxuries for nobles, not necessities for craftsmen. Yet you can see the flicker of longing in his eyes. Even he, grounded in oak and iron, feels the pull of faraway flavors. Nearby, a group of merchants from the Low Countries argue loudly about tariffs and tolls, their voices sharp, their gestures sharper. The Cartwright chuckles, saying merchants argue more than craftsmen, though both rely on wagons to carry wealth. You smile, noticing how every conversation, no matter how grand, loops back to carts and wheels. Without them, wealth stalls, fish rots, and cloth sags unseen. You wander through the crowd, the energy buzzing. A man from the Baltic sings as he sells furs, pelts draped across his shoulders. A woman from France displays glass beads that sparkle like captured stars. A German merchant boasts of beer stronger than Bruges ale, drawing skeptical laughter. Everywhere you look, the square is alive with stories carried from distant lands, each one stitched into the fabric of this city. Another scholarly debate drifts into your thoughts. Historians still argue whether medieval trade fairs truly fostered cultural exchange or remained purely transactional. Did merchants absorb ideas and traditions along with goods, or did they guard their differences fiercely? Watching now, you see both. Laughter between men who share no common tongue, but also suspicion in narrowed eyes when prices shift. Commerce and culture walk hand in hand, sometimes arm in arm, sometimes elbowing each other aside. The Cartwright guides you toward a tavern where traveling merchants gather. Inside, the air is thicker, heavy with smoke, sweat, and the smell of salted meat. Men huddle around tables, mugs raised, stories flowing faster than ale. One recounts a storm at sea, waves higher than towers. Another boasts of crossing mountains with wagons pulled by oxen so stubborn they nearly dragged themselves backward. You sip your ale quietly, letting their words blur into a chorus of exaggeration. Perhaps truth matters less than the performance, each tale a ticket to admiration. Your host exchanges greetings with a merchant he knows, a man dealing in Flemish cloth. They discuss wagon repairs, trade routes, and rumors of unrest along certain roads. The merchant insists carts must be sturdier this year, heavier loads demanding more from wheels. The Cartwright nods, his expression thoughtful. You sense that even here, amid exotic goods and wild stories, the work of shaping wood and iron remains central. Outside again, you notice a boy darting between stalls, offering roasted nuts from a basket. His cries are loud, his smile mischievous. You buy a handful, warm and sweet, and the Cartwright chuckles that such boys are the true rulers of markets. No merchant of velvet can outsell roasted nuts to tired feet. The afternoon grows brighter, the square more crowded. Musicians play on a corner, lutes and pipes weaving lively tunes that merchants ignore, but children dance to. A juggler tosses colored balls into the air, drawing claps and coins. A dog barks furiously at a goose that struts as though it owns the square. You stand in the middle, letting the chaos swirl, feeling the pulse of a city alive with trade, rivalry, and spectacle. The Cartwright sighs, tugging your sleeve, muttering that merchants may boast, but craftsmen endure. He gestures toward a broken cart on the edge of the square, its axle cracked under weight. The merchant shouts in frustration, waving hands, while neighbors laugh quietly. The Cartwright smirks, whispering that even the richest trader is helpless without a good wheel. You grin, realizing the irony. Wealth rests on the shoulders of men who smell of sawdust. Another scholarly debate rises faintly in your mind. Historians still argue whether traveling merchants were respected as vital engines of prosperity or despised as greedy outsiders. You see both reflected here. Admiration in eager buyers' eyes, suspicion in locals' wary glances. The truth likely changed with the day, the mood, and the price of herring. As the sun dips lower, merchants begin to pack their goods. Cloth is rolled, fish sealed, spices covered, and wagons creak once again. Horses snort, oxen shift, and the air fills with the sound of wood and iron preparing for long roads. The square slowly empties, leaving behind scrap. The days slip by in Bruges, and soon you notice how the rhythm of work bends with the seasons. You trudge once more into the Cartwright's workshop, the air cooler than before, the light slanting differently through the open doorway. A pile of half-finished wheels leans against the wall, their spokes jutting like skeletal limbs, waiting for their turn to become whole. The Cartwright greets you with a nod, sweat already streaking his brow, though the morning has barely begun. Today, he explains, is less about routine and more about survival, how labor shifts when winter or summer pushes its way into daily life. He sets down an adze and points to a frame under repair. Wagons suffer more in winter, he says, the damp swelling wood, the iron rims loosening, the mud swallowing wheels. Merchants knock on his door more often in cold months, desperate for repairs to keep their trade alive. Work is steady, but often repetitive. Fixing cracked hubs, tightening rims, replacing spokes softened by moisture. He laughs that winter keeps him busy not by choice, but by accident, like a doctor treating endless sniffles. Summer, on the other hand, demands new carts. Roads dry, trade flourishes, and orders pile in. Merchants plan their journeys. Farmers move harvests. Armies march. Summer is a season of creation, not repair. You imagine the Cartwright laboring in heat, sweat dripping as he shapes oak, knowing each cart built now will roll into stories he will never see. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval economies were deeply seasonal, with cycles of labor tied to harvests, fairs, and weather. Craftsmen like the Cartwright felt this rhythm directly. Winter slowed travel, but increased repair work. Summer opened trade routes and created demand for new wagons. Life was not uniform, but a shifting balance dictated by the calendar and the skies. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some records mention that in winter, when carts could not roll easily, people strapped wooden runners onto wagons, creating crude sledges for icy roads. Imagine a farmer sliding down a frozen lane, his goods bouncing dangerously, shouting prayers and curses in equal measure. Historians still argue whether such contraptions were common or merely occasional improvisations. You picture one now, barreling down a slope, onions scattering like marbles. The Cartwright picks up a spoke, running his fingers along the grain, muttering that good timber is harder to find in winter, when forests are damp. He complains about merchants who demand repairs in impossible time frames, as if seasons can be bent by impatience. You grin, recognizing a universal truth. Customers never adjust their expectations for weather. Apprentices sweep shavings into piles, their breath visible in the chilly air. One boy mutters about frost on the tools. Another complains that his fingers ache. The Cartwright scolds them gently, reminding them that cold makes no excuse for weak work. He demonstrates how to warm a tool handle briefly by the hearth before gripping it, a trick learned after too many frozen mornings. You watch, realizing that even survival here is crafted from small rituals. As midday approaches, the Cartwright pauses to share a crust of bread and a thin slice of cheese with you. The food tastes sharper in the cold, the bread denser, but the ale he pours is warmer, brewed heavier for winter's chill. He explains that in summer, lighter ale refreshes. In winter, stronger ale fortifies. Seasons dictate even the flavor of survival. Another scholarly debate enters your thoughts. Historians still argue whether medieval workers truly experienced leisure in winter or simply shifted to different tasks. Some sources describe long evenings of storytelling and song. Others reveal endless indoor work, from tool maintenance to weaving. Watching the Cartwright's steady labor, you suspect leisure was rare, perhaps moments stolen between chores, never entire days free. In the afternoon, the Cartwright shows you a wagon frame newly built for summer trade. Its wood gleams, still fresh, its joints tight. He explains how in warm months, apprentices labor from dawn until dusk to meet demand. Every frame is needed, every wheel accounted for. You imagine the square filled with new carts, merchants arguing, farmers loading sacks, children climbing aboard wagons as if they were thrones. The sound of hammering carries from a neighbor's shop. The wheelwright is busy too, cursing loudly when a spoke cracks. The Cartwright smirks, muttering that even rivals stumble when the pressure mounts. You laugh softly, understanding how seasons intensify not only labor, but competition. Winter gets patience. Summer tests speed. As dusk falls, the air cools further, breath misting in front of your face. The Cartwright closes the workshop door, sweeping the day's shavings into a pile, muttering that they will serve well as kindling tomorrow. He stretches his arms, joints popping, then gestures for you to follow him into the street. The neighborhood is alive again, neighbors carrying baskets, smoke rising in curls, laughter spilling from doorways. The seasons may shift, but human rhythms endure. You pause near a communal oven, where women bake loaves in the shared heat. The smell is rich, comforting, thicker than the thin air. They laugh and gossip as bread bakes, their voices carrying stories of winter storms and summer fairs. The Cartwright greets them with a smile, accepts a loaf for his family, and nods toward home. You trail behind, holding the warmth of the oven in your memory. Inside his house, supper is ready. Pottage thicker tonight, barley swelling in broth, flavored with onions and salted pork. The family eats quickly, their laughter bright despite the weariness in their eyes. The children chatter about frost patterns on the window, pretending they see shapes of animals. The Cartwright humors them, pointing out what might be a deer, though it looks more like the air of Bruges feels different today. You trudge with the Cartwright toward the main square, and instead of the usual hum of commerce, you hear laughter, pipes, and the beating of drums. Flags flap overhead, bright colors swaying against the pale sky. The town is celebrating, and you are swept along into a festival that transforms the ordinary cobbles into a stage for joy. The square teems with people, more crowded than any market you've yet seen. Children dart between legs, their faces sticky with honey, while jugglers toss bright balls high into the air. A fiddler scrapes out a tune near the fountain, and dancers swirl in rough circles, skirts spinning, boots stomping. The Cartwright smiles faintly, explaining that Bruges hosts such fairs several times a year, tied to saints' days or harvests. For craftsmen, it is both holiday and opportunity. Work pauses, but reputations gleam when wagons parade with goods piled high. Stalls line the square, but today they sell not just cloth and fish, but sweets, roasted nuts, and small pastries dusted with sugar. You buy one, warm and flaky, and nearly burn your tongue biting too quickly. The Cartwright chuckles, saying every festival produces at least one fool who eats too fast, and now you've earned that role. You laugh, wiping sugar from your lips, accepting the lesson. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval towns like Bruges often scheduled fairs around religious festivals, blending sacred and secular. Pilgrims might arrive to venerate relics, while merchants seized the chance to sell goods. These fairs could last days, attracting visitors from far outside the city walls. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some records mention hobby horses parading during Flemish festivals. Men in costumes, shaped like horses prancing comically through the streets. Children squealed with delight, adults cheered, and occasionally the performer stumbled dramatically, to laughter all around. Historians still argue whether these acts were playful satire or symbolic rituals with deeper meaning. Watching children giggle now, you suspect comedy outweighed symbolism. The Cartwright leads you past a group of revelers gathered around a stage where actors perform a morality play. Their costumes are rough, but their gestures exaggerated, voices booming for all to hear. One actor, dressed as greed, waves sacks of coins and trips over his own feet, drawing howls of laughter. Another, playing virtue, brandishes a wooden sword painted silver. The story is simple. The lesson clearer than the church sermon you heard before. Greed falls, virtue rises. The crowd claps, some amused, others nodding solemnly. You realize entertainment and instruction are never far apart in this world. Nearby, a line of craftsmen display their work for pride rather than sale. The Cartwright nods approvingly at a wheelwright's perfectly rounded rim, though he mutters it still wouldn't last a Flemish winter. Others show barrels, looms, and iron tools polished to gleam in the sunlight. The guildmasters stroll, eyes sharp, reminding everyone that standards matter even in celebration. Pride hums in the air. Today is about proving that Bruges thrives not only on trade, but on craft. A procession begins, trumpets announcing its arrival. Town officials march first, robes heavy with embroidery, hats tall and absurd. Behind them, guild banners wave, each painted with symbols of trades. A wheel for Cartwrights, an anvil for smiths, a shuttle for weavers. The Cartwright walks taller, pointing proudly to his guild's banner. You cheer softly, swept into the pride of belonging. Children throw flower petals, chasing after the marchers. Dogs bark, running underfoot, almost tripping the drummers. The crowd roars with laughter when one drummer stumbles, catching himself just in time. Your Cartwright shakes his head, muttering that someone always falls at festivals, and everyone always remembers it. You grin, already certain this stumble will be retold for weeks. Another scholarly debate surfaces in your thoughts. Historians still argue whether medieval festivals provided true relief from daily hardship or simply reinforced the social order. On one hand, laughter and feasting broke monotony. On the other, parades reminded everyone of hierarchy. Watching now, you see both truths: joy mingling with banners of power, celebration stitched with discipline. As afternoon deepens, the fair grows louder. Musicians gather on platforms, fiddles, lutes, and drums, blending into a sound too raucous to be orderly. Couples dance, spinning clumsily but happily. You are pulled into a circle, hands clasped, feet stumbling as you try to follow the steps. The Cartwright laughs at your clumsy turns, though his own footwork is not much better. Together, you spin. Dizzy with noise and motion, until the circle breaks apart in laughter. Food stalls smoke with roasting meats. You buy a skewer of pork, juices dripping down your chin, while the Cartwright insists nothing beats roasted goose. He tears into his portion with relish, grease shining on his beard. You tease him about sharing with the geese that rule the lanes, and he retorts that festivals are the one day geese must surrender. Both of you laugh until your stomachs ache. Later, as dusk approaches, torches flare along the square. The glow makes banners shimmer and faces gleam with sweat. A storyteller climbs onto a platform, his voice carrying as he spins a tale of knights, dragons, and treasures lost. Children gape. Adults nod knowingly, some whispering corrections under their breath. You smile, realizing stories are shaped not only by the teller, but by the crowd's expectations. The Cartwright leans closer, explaining that while festivals offer food and laughter, they also weave memory. People will recall today's jokes, today's parades, today's songs. Even when carts break and bread grows stale, the festival lingers, a bright thread in the fabric of routine. You nod, feeling the next morning begins not with laughter, but with whispers. You trudge into the square with the Cartwright, and though the stalls are open and bread still bakes, the air feels heavier, laced with unease. Men stand in clusters, voices low, eyes darting. Women hush their children, pulling them closer. Even the church bells ring more somberly, as though echoing the mood. Something lingers in the air beyond wood smoke and baking loaves, the scent of rumor, sharp as iron. The Cartwright explains in a hushed tone that talk of war drifts once more through Bruges. Flanders sits in the path of larger powers, France, England, and local counts with ambitions sharper than swords. Soldiers pass through, sometimes friendly, sometimes demanding. Today the whispers are of levies, of crossbow drills, of merchants worrying how war might choke their trade. You feel the tension beneath the cobbles, a reminder that even peaceful carts roll toward uncertain futures. At the Guildhall, men gather in uneasy silence. Crossbows lean against the wall, their strings taut, bolts stacked nearby. The Cartwright admits every guild musters when danger looms, each man expected to defend the town. He picks up a bow, weighing it in his hands, his expression grim. You watch as others test theirs, the creak of strings mixing with muttered prayers. The guild elder reminds them that Bruges thrives only if its craftsmen protect it. Pride and fear mingle, heavier than any feast. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Flemish towns were often caught between the ambitions of France and England during the late Middle Ages. Bruges, prosperous from trade, became both a prize and a battleground, its guilds playing crucial roles in uprisings and defenses. Citizens were not just craftsmen, they were militia when called. And here's your quirky tidbit. One account tells of townsmen practicing with crossbows in churchyards, aiming at wooden targets shaped like birds. The contests blended defense with festival, men boasting of their accuracy, while priests frowned at arrows thudding near gravestones. Historians still argue whether such practices prepared men for true battle or merely offered excuses for bragging rights over ale. The Cartwright strings his bow, aiming at a straw target. His arrow flies, landing wide, and he mutters under his breath. He laughs darkly, claiming he is better with oak than feathers. Still, he practices, as all must. You sense the weight of obligation more than enthusiasm. This is not joy, but survival. In the streets, men speak of levies, coins demanded for soldiers, goods requisitioned for armies. Merchants frown, worrying that war will strangle trade. Farmers mutter about fields trampled. Mothers shake their heads, eyes shadowed. Rumor spreads faster than fact, yet fear feels real enough to reshape the day. The Cartwright's wife listens grimly at supper, her children quiet as he explains the drills. She mutters that war steals fathers from homes, leaving women to keep families alive. He nods, saying nothing, his eyes heavy. You sit quietly, sensing how fragile this household feels under the weight of distant kings and near armies. Later, as you walk with him through the neighborhood, you hear louder voices. Two men argue in the street, one insisting England will support Flanders, another swearing France will crush any rebellion. Their words clash like swords, but neither carries proof, only conviction. Neighbors listen, nod, or scoff, the argument swirling as though it could decide the fate of armies. The Cartwright sighs, muttering that talk is cheap, but still dangerous. Another scholarly debate surfaces in your thoughts. Historians still argue whether ordinary craftsmen truly embraced political causes, or were swept along by leaders and guild elders. Were they patriots or pawns? Watching the Cartwright, weary but dutiful, you suspect the truth lies between. Pride anchors him, but so does obligation. The guild resumes drills in the square. Men line up, bows ready, bolts whistling through air towards straw birds and painted circles. Children cheer, clapping at each shot, unaware of the tension behind it. Women watch silently, some crossing themselves, others biting lips. The sound of arrows becomes a drumbeat, steady, unsettling. That evening, Aigle flows heavier than usual. Men gather in taverns, voices sharp, laughter brittle. Jokes about arrows missing targets mingle with mutters of soldiers marching nearby. The Cartwright joins briefly, sipping his mug in silence. He smiles faintly at jokes, but speaks little. You sense his mind elsewhere, weighing the burden of protecting family and craft against the power of armies he cannot control. At home, the children ask if war will come. He assures them gently that Bruges is strong, its guilds brave. His wife listens without expression, her hands busy kneading dough. You wonder whether she believes him, or whether she simply chooses silence to keep the night calm. The next day, word arrives of merchants robbed on a road outside the city. Panic rises. Some claim it was bandits. Others insist it was soldiers in disguise. The Cartwright shakes his head, muttering that fear always paints bigger monsters than truth. Still, he checks the locks on his workshop twice before sleeping. Another scholarly debate drifts into your mind. Historians still argue whether towns like Bruges flourished in spite of constant conflict or because of it. War created demand, carts, weapons, supplies, but also threatened the very trade that made the city rich. Was conflict curse or fuel? Look, the week wears on, and with it comes a heaviness that you can feel in your shoulders as much as in the air of Bruges. You trudge once more into the Cartwright's workshop, and though the day begins like any other, with sawdust underfoot, iron rims stacked against the wall, and apprentices yawning at their posts, there is a fatigue humming beneath the surface. It is the kind of tiredness that no feast or festival fully erases, the kind that settles into bone and lingers. The Cartwright stretches, rubbing his lower back with a groan that sounds older than his years. He glances at you with a half smile, and mutters that even oak splits if you lean on it too long. He picks up a mallet, testing its weight as though reminding his body of the rhythm, then sets it down again with a sigh. His hands are calloused, rough as bark, his nails rimmed with dirt no scrubbing can remove. Every line on his palms feels like the record of a cart built, a wheel repaired, or an ankle hammered into stubborn place. You realize fatigue is not just physical here. It is also the slow grind of repetition, the weight of endless days that look too much alike. Still, the work continues. The apprentices sweep the floor, shavings crackling under their brooms. One boy yawns too loudly, and the Cartwright swats at him with mock annoyance. Laughter ripples through the workshop, though it is the kind of laughter that hides tired eyes. Even the tools seem weary. Blades dull faster, handles creak in hands, saws catch more easily on knots. You watch as he sharpens and adds with deliberate strokes, sparks flying, his concentration steady despite the slump in his shoulders. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval craftsmen often worked from dawn to dusk, their days structured not by clocks, but by light and necessity. Fatigue was constant, yet rest was limited. Holy days offered pauses, but most weeks stretched long, especially during peak trade seasons. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some records mention that craftsmen fell asleep at benches, tools still in hand, only to wake when a mallet slipped and struck the floor. One tale insists a wheelwright once dreamed of spokes so vividly that he woke shouting instructions to imaginary apprentices. Historians still argue whether such anecdotes reflect truth or exaggeration. But you glance at the yawning boys here and decide the stories are plausible. The Cartwright gestures toward the straw-stuffed mattress in the corner, explaining that sometimes, during the busiest months, he collapses right here in the workshop rather than trudging home. The mattress is lumpy, its straw spilling in uneven clumps, yet he shrugs as though it is sufficient. Comfort, he reminds you, is measured not in softness, but in survival. You lie down briefly, the straw poking through the fabric, and laugh at the crunch beneath you. He chuckles, saying medieval sleep always came with sound effects. Later, during the midday pause, you sit with him at the table outside. The bread is coarse, the cheese sharp, the ale sourer than yesterday's. He chews slowly, staring into the distance. His wife joins briefly, setting down a small bowl of dried fruit, a rare treat. The children nibble eagerly, while the Cartwright sighs, muttering that such sweetness makes the fatigue of labor almost worth it. His wife smiles knowingly, then returns to her chores, leaving him to lean against the wall, eyes half closed. The apprentices argue over whose turn it is to fetch more timber. Their voices rise, sharp but playful, until the Cartwright intervenes with a stern glance. He tells them fatigue is no excuse for laziness. They quiet immediately, though one mutters under his breath. You grin, remembering your own tired complaints in other lifetimes, other workplaces. Perhaps apprentices everywhere have always whined when exhaustion set in. Another scholarly debate creeps into your thoughts. Historians still argue whether medieval people slept in one long stretch as we do today, or in two shorter phases, with a waking interval in the middle of the night. Some sources describe people rising at midnight to pray, talk, or even work briefly before returning to bed. Watching the Cartwright's weary nods, you suspect both patterns existed. Fatigue decides more than custom. As the afternoon stretches, the work resumes, slower now, each strike of hammer a little less forceful. The Cartwright sharpens his focus, determined not to let weariness cause mistakes. A cracked hub or crooked spoke is more dangerous than sore shoulders. Yet even he cannot hide the sag in his stance, the pauses that grow longer between tasks. He mutters that men are like wheels, steady when strong, useless when cracked. You laugh softly, though you sense he means it more than he admits. By evening, the workshop closes. The apprentices scatter, grateful for rest. The Cartwright locks the door, stretching once more, his body creaking like timber under strain. He leads you home, where supper waits. Tonight's pottage is thicker, flavored with carrots and leeks. The family eats in silence at first, too tired even for chatter. Only after mugs of ale loosen tongues do jokes begin to surface. The children tease their father for groaning louder than the cartwheels he builds. He grins, conceding the point, and laughs until his shoulders shake. After supper, he collapses onto a bench, eyes drooping. His wife scolds him gently to at least wash before sleeping, and he obeys with mock obedience. You watch the domestic ritual unfold, fatigue challenged by humor, laughter softening the grind. Even exhaustion becomes bearable when shared. Later, as the fire dims, you lie once more on the straw mattress. The Cartwright explains that medieval beds were rarely luxurious. Straw mattresses were common, lumpy and noisy, replaced when vermin or mold made them unbearable. Wealthier households stuffed beds with feathers, but for most, straw was the norm. You shift uncomfortably, listening to the crunch beneath you, realizing each toss and turn echoes. Privacy is impossible when sleep itself makes noise. Another scholarly debate stirs. Historians still argue whether medieval sleep was restful at all, given cold rooms, hard beds, and shared spaces. Some claim constant interruptions left people perpetually tired. Others argue that routines and sheer exhaustion made even poor beds sufficient. Watching the Cartwright drift off instantly, snoring softly, you lean toward the latter. Work hard enough, and Anytwood becomes paradise. You lie awake longer, listening to the sounds of the household, the crackle of embers, the soft breaths of children, the shuffle of the Cartwright turning in sleep. Beyond the walls, Bruges murmurs faintly, distant dogs barking, a watchman's call, the splash of canal water. The world feels both heavy and comforting, fatigue draped over everything like a blanket. In that stillness, you realize fatigue is not merely a burden here. It is proof of survival, a reminder that labor has filled the day, that bread and broth will come tomorrow. The Cartwright snores, the children sighs, even the crunch of straw beneath you, all weave into a lullaby of exhaustion. You close your eyes, letting the rhythm of weary breaths carry you into dreams. The week in Bruges winds slowly toward its end, and you feel the weight of routine and memory pressing together. You trudge beside the Cartwright through streets that now seem familiar, every cobble echoing with footsteps you have taken before. The smell of bread wafts from ovens, the sharp tang of fish drifts from barrels, and the sound of saws carries from workshops. All of it feels steady, ordinary, even comforting. The Cartwright greets neighbors with weary nods, his voice softer, his jokes slower. A week of labor leaves him tired, but also proud, and you sense the satisfaction hidden beneath his sighs. He leads you back into his workshop, where the tools wait in their usual places, lined up like quiet soldiers. The half-finished cart frame leans on trestles, spokes stacked beside it, iron rims resting against the wall. Sawdust still coats the floor, glowing faintly in afternoon light. He gestures around, as though to say this space is his life, his measure of time. You listen to the silence here, heavier than the clatter of tools, and realize that fatigue itself has become a kind of companion. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the later Middle Ages, guild regulations in cities like Bruges shaped not only craft, but daily existence. Rules dictated who could build carts, who could sell, and even who could teach apprentices. Guild power stretched into family, worship, and civic life. binding craftsmen as tightly as iron rims bound wheels. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some guilds recorded the mischief of apprentices, including boys sneaking extra ale or carving jokes into beams. One note even describes an apprentice drawing a crude wheel with legs, claiming it could roll itself to market. Historians still argue whether such antics were tolerated as harmless fun or punished as dangerous idleness. You picture a boy laughing at his doodle while his master grumbled nearby. The Cartwright sits on a bench, wiping his hands with a rag, then pours a small mug of ale. He offers you one as well, and together you drink in silence. The ale is sour, the taste familiar now, less shocking than before. You lean back, feeling the steady rhythm of this place settling into you, as though sawdust has crept into your veins. Outside, the bells toll, marking another hour lost, another hour endured. The Cartwright mutters that weeks blur together, each one shaped by wood, iron, bread, ale, and gossip. Yet he smiles faintly, insisting that boredom has its comforts. Better, he says, to live in rhythm than in chaos. You nod, understanding how repetition itself becomes strength. Another scholarly debate comes to mind. Historians still argue whether medieval townspeople were aware of living through history or simply through days. Did they think of themselves as part of great stories, or just men and women surviving? Watching the Cartwright sip his ale, you suspect the latter. Life is measured not in chronicles, but in tools sharpened, meals eaten, nights endured. The apprentices wander in, sweeping shavings, whispering jokes, eager for release. The Cartwright scolds half-heartedly, too tired for real anger. They laugh, promise to work harder tomorrow, and slip away. You realize the weekend's not with grandeur, but with small gestures repeated endlessly. Work never ends, but pauses offer enough. The Cartwright's wife arrives, calling him home for supper. He rises slowly, joints stiff, but his eyes gentle. He pats your shoulder, murmuring that a week shows much, but a lifetime shows more. You follow him outside, the streets glowing faintly in dusk light. Children play with hoops, neighbors gossip near wells, dogs bark lazily. Nothing extraordinary, yet everything necessary. As the sky deepens, stars appear above Bruges, faint pinpricks against shadow. The canals gleam softly, reflecting lanterns hung along bridges. The city exhales, weary from another. The week has faded, and now the rhythm softens, every sound growing slower, every image less sharp. You let your breath match the quiet, steady, and unhurried, as though time itself has decided to pause. The streets of Bruges lie behind you. The workshop rests, the tools are silent, and the Cartwright sleeps. The hum of saws, the creak of wheels, the gossip of markets, all dissolve into memory, leaving only calm. You imagine lying back beneath a soft sky, the faint shimmer of stars above, the air cool but gentle. Each breath drifts longer, each thought drifts lighter, until words themselves blur. The noise of the day, the labor of weeks, the weight of centuries, all slip away like dust carried by a breeze. You do not need to hold anything. You can let it fall, knowing the rhythm will continue without you. Your body feels heavier, your mind quieter, every detail softening at the edges. Wheels no longer turn, hammers no longer strike, bells no longer echo. Only the whisper of rest remains. You sink deeper, as though straw has become cloud, and cloud has become silence. Let yourself close your eyes fully, knowing the story has folded gently shut. The week is over, the work complete, and peace waits patiently. Breathe slowly, let the last echoes fade, and drift into sleep, calm and unbroken.